All right. Greetings and welcome to the recombobulation area. My name is Dan Shafer. Thank you for joining us. Our guest today is none other than Angela Lang, the co-executive director of Black Leaders Organizing for Communities. And Angela, it's been some discombobulating times lately, so I'm excited to recombobulate with you today.
Same. Lots to talk about. Lots going on.
Lots going on. So lots to catch up on, a lot of ground to cover. And because of that, I wanted to kind of go back and forth with three headlines, three topics. One of those being a Milwaukee specific story. So I brought three headlines. You have three topics. We're just going to go back and forth. You're the guest here. Why don't you go first?
Yeah, so I think where to start. There's so much happening. I think the first thing that's on the top of my mind is, the governor's state of the state. The mayor and the county executive will have their, state of the city and county speeches as well. So it really just has me thinking about like, what is the state of one, the world, but what is the state of Wisconsin and on the city and county levels, knowing that this moment that we're in is very scary. There were folks texting this morning about, hey, I see a suspicious vehicle. Is this ICE at like 7:30 in the morning? And so for me, I'm trying to like reconcile like how does one even approach, the state of our state is strong or the state of our city is strong when there's so much happening, even outside of some of our elected leaders' control, knowing that a lot of these challenges are on the federal level. So I'm very curious to see how elected officials, when they give these various speeches, have hopefully an honest tone, but also one that's like uplifting, but not trying to, I guess, minimize the moment that we're in too.
Yeah. That is a tricky balance to strike because, I feel like the biggest story in the country has been with our neighbors next door in Minnesota for the past, month plus here with Operation Metro Surge and everything that has come with that and the killings of Renee Good and Alex Peretti. So how do you talk about that and still strike an optimistic tone? How can you be, live in opposition to the Trump administration to this moment and try to, point for a better direction forward? I've been following some of what Mayor Cavalier Johnson has been talking about in the early goings of this year, talking about this being a year of housing, of that being, a focus of his this year. He's one of, there are a lot of people running for office this year in the state of Wisconsin. He is not one of them. So it would be interesting to see how, some of that focus takes shape. I know you and I ran into each other at last year's State of the City address and maybe didn't have the most positive reaction to some of what was said. And
sorry.
it was yeah, I mean, it was a frustrating moment, I think, for a lot of us, just generally, like first couple months of the Trump administration last year. There was a lot going on and a lot to be really concerned with, and I think you and I were in agreement that it didn't really strike the tone that we were looking for from an elected official in a city like Milwaukee at the time. But there's a little bit of time yet before Mayor Johnson takes the stage
so
for
if you're
that.
Listening, here's some free advice. No.
Yeah.
No, I think people just want to feel seen and that their issues are heard. And President Obama has been making kind of the rounds on the podcast, and the racist social media posts that Trump has posted about Obama, and for him to I have my criticisms of him, but I think a lot of us have a little bit of a soft spot for Obama and that kind of hope and change feel and what he inspired us. But I think he does a really good job of balancing that, of saying, things are terrible, but like we're better than this. And I think people just want that honesty, that people know that like people are being seen and that their issues are being heard, and it's not just some fancy everything's rainbow and sunshines. Like we need to have honest conversations.
Yeah, that's what I felt was kind of missing last year.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
just like stark honesty about the moment that we're in, the challenges that we're facing. And I think after a year plus of Trump being in office and so much, kind of that has rolled downhill from that since,
Yeah.
and how that's impacting local governments and how that's impacting the state of Wisconsin and the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County and all of these different things. Like, what's the tone going to be this time for that kind of a speech? But today is the governor's speech, the governor's
Yeah.
final State of the State speech, and that actually dovetails into one of my headlines that I plucked for this little back and forth that we've got here too. So the headline from Wisconsin Watch: as Tony Evers delivers his final State of the State, he remains crosswise with the GOP legislature. And I have been thinking a lot about the end of this certain era in
Mhm.
Wisconsin politics and state politics, that it seems like we're kind of coming to an end maybe as soon as this week in a lot of
Mhm.
ways, right? Because with Evers delivering his State of the State, there's been a lot of headlines about some sort of negotiation on a property tax and school
Yeah.
funding package between the governor and Republican leadership in the legislature. It has been 8 years, almost 8 years now of divided government in
Yeah.
Wisconsin, with a Democratic governor in Tony Evers and a Republican-controlled state legislature, led, at least in the assembly throughout the duration of that, by Robin Voss. And so I think, and the way the calendar works in the legislature uh, often means that they are going to be basically done with their session in legislating, perhaps as soon as the end of this week. I know the assembly has a floor session coming up within a matter of days here. There's going to be a whole lot of votes being held. And I think some of the reporting that came out just within the last 24 hours was talking about, oh, the Republicans have this proposal. It might not include this ask from Tony Evers, whatever it might be. And so I think, their legislature has this kind of like self-imposed imaginary deadline that they
Yeah.
want to finish everything up by March and then take their 9-month break and just campaign and fundraise for the next few months to gear up for the fall election. So they could just go through this process normally and not go
Mhm.
through this self-imposed deadline. Maybe that dynamic changes if the legislature flips to Democratic control next year. Maybe not. Who knows? But I just feel like there's kind of a little bit of Last Dance vibes
Yeah.
with what's going on here. What do you make of it all?
It definitely feels like Last Dance, but it also feels like, thinking of like this era. Um, I think about the Scott Walker era, right? And how that felt so intense, so divided. And a lot of us remember election night in 2018 and refreshing those results. And I think it was like 1 a.m. where then people
Waiting
tweeted,
for the Milwaukee
"Oh,"
votes.
and
Yep.
I was like, "Oh," and my phone blew up, and it was kind of I would say premature celebration once people kind of saw that. But that feeling of feeling that, like, oh, we're finally in a new chapter, we're finally in a new phase. Maybe the state is going to be less divided now, was the hope a little bit. And I think it is
Such
a
an
little
optimist, Angela.
every once in a while.
Yeah.
But I do think it's less divided, in the sense of kind of like the tone that Walker took. I think obviously their demeanor between Walker and Evers, stark differences, right?
A little bit. A little
The
bit.
governor loves his ice cream and his cheese curd day, and being kind of like the hokey grandpa, right? And like that works. But then also, if I'm a little nervous, I'm not saying a Dem can't win, but I'm very curious of what this next phase now looks like, understanding, going back to what we said before, where our country is. We've had kind of this softer, yes, I had lots of criticism, but we had a softer tone in the governor. And what does it look like in this next phase? I don't
Hmm.
know.
Yeah, I mean the whole governor's race. We're going to have a lot to look forward to with how that takes shape. Obviously, especially on the Democratic side, where there are 7 candidates vying for that nomination. We'll see what will take shape with that. But I think you're right. Tony Evers has, he is just the kind of Wisconsin's uncle playing euchre at the fish fry
Yeah.
type
Yeah.
of guy, and he Marquette polling consistently puts him or Tammy Baldwin as the most popular politician in the state of Wisconsin, and I think with
Hmm.
good reason. But I took note of one part of that Wisconsin Watch story, which goes into kind of the fraught dynamic between Evers and the legislature, how so many of these battles have spilled into the courts. The state Supreme Court's role in all of this. But here's one that kind of caught my attention in the piece here, and I'm just going to read right from it. Asked to reflect on his own legacy, Evers highlighted for Wisconsin Watch three specific achievements: a deal that kept the Milwaukee Brewers in Milwaukee through 2050, a shared revenue deal that boosted state support for local municipalities, and the replacement of heavily gerrymandered GOP maps with quote unquote fair maps. But he also criticized the often contentious relationship with the legislature. What do you think of Evers plucking those three as the first three things that come to mind when he's reflecting on his legacy?
Yeah. I see why he chose those three things. Am I a fan of how all those three things happened, went down, the process, especially the shared revenue? Got lots of criticisms over that, and we've talked about it at length.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I see, putting myself in his shoes, I understand as a governor how these things are big, right? Like, these are big monumental things, whether you agree with them or not. Making sure that the baseball team stays here, yes, there's a lot of details behind it and some of the process and all of that, and shared revenue, and I think these are big things. I also am curious, if I were to ask him that question, like, what do you want your legacy to be outside of policy? Right? Like, because we just talked about, like, he's that guy that, you can, I feel like I could play goldfish with, or, whatever, and joke around, while also criticizing him. And I'm curious about how he views his legacy. Does he feel he did everything that he could to protect and defend the people of Wisconsin, especially under a Trump administration? Does he feel, I still personally have issues with, the lack of deadline for Green Bay closing, and all of our
Green
mass
Bay Correctional
incarceration.
Facility, not the
Yes,
city
thank
of
you.
Green Bay.
Yeah, sorry, not the city of Green Bay. No, we love Green Bay, the correctional facility. Thank you for that important clarification. But I think I'm curious to see, like, more of the human side and less policy. And I think, of course, he's gonna ride the fair maps thing. It was a big deal,
Mm-hmm.
but also, they're fairer, right? They're maps. They are what they are, for the moments that they're in. But, um, I'm curious more of, like, the personality, and legacy in that way of how do you view how you showed up for Wisconsin. And it's not to say
Mm-hmm.
he didn't. I'm just curious his thoughts.
Yeah, and I think too, so much of his time as governor, and the three things that he noted there, I will mention, all came in his second term.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's an interesting piece of it too. It's just like when he's reflecting, it is these, maybe it's a recency bias or whatever it might be, but it is three things that happened during his second term, and making the shared revenue deal a priority in his campaign. Like, it's a pretty wonky thing to talk about in a campaign, to say that this
Yeah.
is your number one priority in your second term. But as we've written exhaustively at the recombobulation area with Phil Rocco's gold award winning series on the shared revenue debate, it was a huge, huge deal. And I wrote a ton about the maps, and those were a huge, huge deal.
Yeah.
And so, I always look at so many different public policy things as just like, what's the decision at the top, and not like the what rolls downhill or comes
Yeah.
downstream from that. And those are
Yeah.
two, like, very much decisions at the top that, like, maybe things as they went downhill, were implemented or had some details that were wrong, but
Yeah.
the big picture was right. That
Yeah.
Tony Evers got right, was saying we need to fix the state shared revenue formula because
Yeah.
local governments are going broke. We need to do something about this now. We need to make this, my top issue in my campaign. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
And the fair maps thing too, like, the details of how everything was implemented, the exact, like, partisan makeup of the maps or whatever, we can get wrong. But Tony Evers, even through his first term with the People's Maps Commission and some of the other
Yeah.
stuff, like, he always has this North Star about
Yeah.
doing what's right for Wisconsin that I've always really appreciated and agree with, even if there are some details along the way that I will disagree with, sometimes vehemently disagree with. But I think the North Star is always in the right spot when it comes to Evers.
And I think that is a super fair and generous, I think, analysis too, because I do think his heart is in the right place. I always tell people all the time, I'm like, I like the governor as a person. I do think his heart is in the right place, but politics is going to be politics, especially in a state like Wisconsin, especially in a Republican controlled legislature under Robin Voss, right?
Yeah.
We know that what he wants is not going to be what happens. And there's compromises, and we saw budgets and all sorts of things. And you're right. I do think he always had the best intentions. Do I wish that maybe sometimes he would have fought a little more so we didn't have some of those like kind of bad compromises and details? Sure. But it's a heck of a lot more than I think we could say of the previous governor, and I think that does say something.
For sure, for sure.
I mean, it's a low bar too, but
Yeah,
still.
yeah, a huge step up, and I think so much of what, if I'm reflecting on what I think are some of his biggest accomplishments, I think it's playing the defense that he has played
Yeah.
throughout his 8 years and stopping the worst impulses from the Republican-controlled state legislature from becoming law. And I think back to 2020 and early 2021, all the stuff with the election, with the attempt, the fake electors, and the attempt to overturn, and like the fact that it got to the state Supreme Court and it was a 4-3 decision, and like Evers had to stand in the way of so much awfulness around that time, and so I think we had a great goalie for the last 8 years in Wisconsin. I'd like to see a little more scoring in the years to come. Put a few more points on the board, but Evers has been a terrific goalie. So I think that I think to me is the hallmark of his legacy.
Yeah, and we tell people all the time, with our relationship, and they're like, "Oh, do you, try to do lobbying in the legislature?" And I'm like, "Listen, the way Wisconsin is set up, I have better things to do with my time. Our goal is to make sure we have a decent enough, sometimes it's been tense, a decent enough relationship with the governor's office where we're like, hey, we're making sure you're signing what you need to sign and vetoing what you need to veto." And that's kind of what it came down to a lot, unfortunately, because of how the legislature has been controlled under Robin Voss.
Yeah. I wonder if this is going to be the end for Voss too. Like the rumors come around every 2 years at this time.
Yes.
Like they were here a couple of years, in 24 and 22, and like people think he's going to go. He spends a lot of time vacationing abroad while he's on the job, and I imagine he wants to get to that phase of his life where he's off on the cruise boat for a while. Is this going to be the year? I don't really know. I've heard. I will say that the rumors are louder than they've ever been.
Yes.
For Robin Voss retiring at the end of his term, which would mean stepping down as Assembly Speaker before that were to happen. But I don't want to be Charlie Brown with the football and just running up to try to kick the field goal and have the ball pulled away again. Yeah. I'll believe it when he actually resigns, and even after that, I'm not sure if I will really believe it. So
I mean, I think that just goes to show if you've been in Wisconsin politics long enough, you're gonna end up being a little jaded of like, I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, I guess I've reached that point now.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to our next topic then. Do you want to start us off since I did the headline, the last headline here? Yeah.
So, if for folks that have been listening to Greg Box and I's conversation on Civic Media Mornings on occasion, we have been talking about this amendment, this DEI amendment. I would say it's anti-DEI amendment that is being proposed. It will be on the ballot in November. That would prohibit government entities in the state from discriminating against or granting preferential treatment to any individual or group on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, et cetera, right? That sounds great. You can't discriminate people because of these things. And like most ballot initiatives in Wisconsin, worded in a way where you think you're voting one way and it's actually the devil's in the details. And why this is harmful is because, one, we understand what's happening on a federal level with DEI issues, but we also know who's putting it forth, right? It's very interesting. It's white men Republicans that are like, you can't discriminate. And so basically what it's saying, it's not to protect DEI. It's not, pro affirmative action or anything of that nature. It is saying you can't discriminate against white people. So we want to start having those conversations now, because if you look at it, the little language that I did read sounds like any person that's not bigoted would vote yes for that. And that's intentional.
Yep, it is. And I I can't stand these constitutional amendments that
Oh, yeah, me
Republicans have
neither.
been pushing. Like I think they are, and we're talking. I always, what's upstream, what's coming
Yeah.
down. Like these conversations come from the fact that they can't get anything passed that Evers would actually sign. Like
Mhm.
these
Mhm.
constitutional amendments that have ended up on the ballot, the Republicans they have to pass them in two successive sessions of the
Yep.
legislature for them to get on the ballot statewide for it to be something where we would amend the state constitution to implement this. And I have adopted a personal policy. I'm voting no on no matter all of these constitutional amendments, no matter what.
Sure. Yeah.
Even if it were to say like we pass, it is the state constitution that the Milwaukee Bucks win the NBA Finals every year. I'm voting against it. Doesn't
I mean,
matter
is
what
this
it
how we
is.
govern? This is
I'm
just how we're
it's
governing now?
it is such an absurd way to govern, and like I think there was the one of theirs of the Republican initiatives there that lost. It was like during the I believe it was during
Mm,
the 2024 partisan primary in August where
yes.
they tried to put one on in August primary ballot, and that was like pretty ridiculous in its own.
Yeah.
And Wisdems actually spent money to organize against it, and it
Mhm.
did fail.
Mhm.
Um, but there have been so many others that have passed, and so like the majority of the time these make it to the ballot, they are
Yep.
going to pass. And after that one failed in August of 2024, Robin Voss people asked Robin Voss if like he's going to stop doing this now because it failed, and he's like, no, I think we're going to do more of them because we
Yeah.
can't, you know,
And
we're
he
going to
knew.
double down on this because like the governor isn't signing our stuff and we want this to pass, so we're just going to take it to the voters. Never mind you that he is blocking any kind of like other, state ballot referendum on like
Mhm.
abortion rights or Medicaid
Right.
expansion or marijuana legalization or any one of these things that would pass easily in the state of Wisconsin that he has stood in front of. It's these like carefully worded, very
Mhm.
confusing. And you've got like the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, the real bastions of equality and
Mm.
righteousness and liberty
Always.
and diversity and over there they're fighting tooth and nail against DEI. That's the real big threat to liberty in 2026. Are you fucking kidding me? Um,
Yeah.
anyway, but I think I totally in agreement with you. This is deceptive. This
Yeah.
is actually anti DEI, and it's going to take some organizing to run up against it too.
And to go back to your point of how Robin Voss was like, no, we're going to do more of this. He knows that even though that one amendment failed, the amount of money that was spent and like the big lift of a campaign of like not just Wisdom's and the governor's office and seeing his social media posts, everything about it. But there were a lot of organizations, grassroots organizations on the ground.
Yeah.
And I will say, I don't think I've seen a coordinated effort around a ballot initiative like that in quite some time. I think the last one I saw was raising the minimum wage during the Mary Burke election. That was very
Mm.
coordinated. I mean, it passed, but Robin Voss was like, yeah, we don't really care. But he knows that, cool, we may have gotten one win and have defeated that one. He knows it wasn't sustainable to run the same level of campaign and coordination for every single ballot initiative. So of course he's going to keep trying.
Yeah. Yep. And I do wonder if this is the type of thing. Once we get to fall, we got a long way to get there. But like
Oh,
once we get to the November election, like would you and other folks in Milwaukee like organize on this ballot initiative specifically,
oh,
and get people to? Do you think this
absolutely.
is could also backfire to a certain extent and be a motivating factor to get people who might not otherwise to get to the polls?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tactic I think a lot of folks, Dems have been doing, especially when people put, marijuana on the ballot or raising the minimum wage and all these types of things. The left had been doing that, or Dems have been doing that for years in order to get people to the polls for their candidate. I'm
Mm-hmm.
actually very surprised it took the Republicans so long to kind of get hip to that strategy. Um, but now that they're doing it again, they're wording it very carefully. And so for us, it's February. We're having these conversations. I'm kicking around a piece in my head about this. I'm like, at some point, I need to write about this, but there's so much, and I'm organizing it and trying to figure out the perfect timing of it all. But this is something that I think a lot of groups are going to talk about because it's going to be a lot of education. If someone is like, oh yeah, I'm voting because I care about the governor's race, cool, flip that ballot over. Make sure that you are voting. And if you are seeing that for the first time, you may have done your due diligence and research on the candidates, but if you didn't know about that ballot amendment and you see that language, you're going to vote for it. So I think Greg Bach and I have talked about this all the time. It is February, and we have to start talking about this now so people are not deceived.
You're absolutely right. It's going to be a big issue. And I look forward to having a more substantive conversation about it
Yeah.
in the months to come. Because now that we know it's going to be on the November ballot, like
Hmm.
it's going to be a topic for these next months. The governor candidates will be asked about it.
Yep.
People in the legislature will be asked about it. It will be a campaign topic. And sorting the signal through the noise being the complicated wording of this particular proposal is going to be difficult, but
Yeah.
we can get there.
I
All
think
right,
so.
next topic. I've got a headline to talk about here. So this is my I asked for one of these three. I said we should make it Milwaukee specific. So this is my Milwaukee specific headline from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Milwaukee alders introduce resolution declaring food apartheid a public health emergency. So a number of members of the Milwaukee Common Council, members of Cavalier Johnson, members of his administration, held a press conference. What was the date on this? February 10th, last week, to talk about this issue in Milwaukee, where so many grocery stores, particularly on the north and northwest side, have been closing, and it's there. I believe there's an Aldi, Century. I forget the status of like the Sherman Park, more independent grocery store, of like kind of where things are at with that. But this has been an ongoing problem
Yeah.
in the city for some time that has really spiked in recent months. And so at the press conference, they talked about what this resolution would mean. There was also like already a resolution declaring a food apartheid, mirroring a similar declaration in Milwaukee County. Marcelia Nicholson, I believe, kind of led that effort at the county. But now it's going to the city, and folks from the Department of City Development were there for this. There are two things I want to talk about with this. One, I think this public grocery store idea that Zoran Mamdani has talked about in New York,
Mm.
I do wonder if this is an interesting concept to bring to Milwaukee. Like, Mamdani is probably a little bit left to me politically in a lot of ways, as you well know.
Mm.
But this is a story that I think is interesting, but it's because it gets to just a very core issue of just like, do people in our city and community have access to food?
Yeah, I mean, a basic question. I think one, I want to give a huge shout out to Metcalf Park Community Bridges, who has been really stepping up. I mean, they've always been on the front line, but they've really stepped up, um, making sure people understood what was going on, organizing, rallying, and it was through a lot of their work and efforts that we are able to see these bills and these policies being passed. I also want to name, and I think my friends at Metcalf Park would agree with me, is that yes, there's been a tremendous spike over the last year of grocery stores closing. Um, there's also been challenges long before this. I think it's just we're more in dire need now. And I think of like my own upbringing. I was raised on 32nd in Wisconsin. My mom didn't drive. We took the bus where we had to grocery store or where we had to grocery shop. And way back in the day, there used to be like the Kohl's grocery store that you could. It was in walking distance, and then that closed, and we were like, okay, we have to go find a pick and save. And then sometimes you're on the bus carrying groceries of bags because there isn't anything close, especially if you don't have a car, don't have the means to always take. Back in
Mm-hmm.
the day, it was a taxi or a cab, Lyft or
Mm-hmm.
Uber, for some of those things. And this was in like the late 90s, early 2000s, right? So we're talking 20 plus years now. And it's only gotten worse. And
Yeah.
so I am curious to see how folks are able to move forward. I think all options should be on the table right now, right? Whether they're co-ops or what have you. People, this is a basic necessity, and I think we're saying it, but let me just like name it, that it's happening on the north side of Milwaukee, where it's predominantly black, and they're in some cases low income, depending on the neighborhood. And we've even seen things like Walgreens like close, and where some of the elders are like, "That's where I go get my prescription. Where do
Hmm.
I go now?" And so I think I'm really glad to see that people are recognizing the situations that we're in. But I think people need to get creative in exploring how do we make sure that we no longer continue to have these food deserts, especially in Black and Brown and low income communities.
Absolutely. And these are most grocery stores and places like this operate on really low profit margins. So
Yeah.
it's not like they're, jacking up the price of carrots this week to
Right.
really make a killing, right? And
Right.
so and I think, the response from my friends on the right who are just in my Twitter mentions all day and night, all the time, their response to this would be like, well, there's a lot of theft at these grocery stores, and like you cut into any kind of profit margin, you're going to impact that business's bottom line. Maybe we should have a different approach to making it safer and better access to food,
Hmm.
instead of just never having any criticism of these businesses who
Right.
will move, like Walgreens will move out of these places and cite theft or whatever it is, and then a
Yep.
report will come out and be like, no, this didn't actually have anything to do with theft. This was a corporate decision that they're just downsizing, and
Yep.
whatever it might be.
I mean, hot take.
Yeah,
I will never be upset of somebody that is like stealing bread. Like, you know what I mean? Like, people are not stealing, like
right.
things that are just like, oh, I'm bored. I kind of want this. People are stealing things because people haven't had a raise in a minimum wage. Like, so if we really want to talk about that, people are having
Yeah,
to go to these situations where they have to survive. And I actually read this kind of heartwarming article this morning that the owner, or one of the owners of the 7-Eleven at UWM, which is with all the college kids, keeps getting, like they've been getting not robbed, but people have been stealing, right?
sure.
And the owner said, I would never turn in, like videos or anything to the police. I would much rather give them that food, because I would not want to ruin a student's life. He was like, I could not live with myself if a student got suspended because he stole something from my store. And
Mm,
so he's talking about how, like, if you are in need, like, he would much rather pay for your food than have you steal it. And I thought that that was just a really great way, and like to think about some of these things, because I see that argument. Well, what's going to happen if everyone keeps stealing from these places? Well, let's have a bigger conversation of what people are stealing and why, right? Like,
hmm.
people aren't stealing, for luxury. People are stealing to survive. And so, what do we do with that?
Right. People aren't. If people are stealing from a grocery store, it's different from stealing from a car dealership or whatever,
Exactly.
right? Like it's a very
Exactly.
different thing that's going on here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think maybe again, let's look upstream. Let's
Hmm.
address those root causes of poverty that are causing people to feel so desperate they feel the need to rob a grocery store.
Right.
But I do think that lends to the conversation that's been happening with Mom Donnie and whatever else. Like a public grocery store, I think, is an interesting idea, and I
Hmm.
do think it warrants greater exploration. And I think some of what the city folks were talking about in this meeting, giving grants to some of these grocery stores. I think there was one example of a Sendix owner who needed to update the refrigerators in his
Hmm.
grocery store and couldn't do it because, again, they operate on these slim profit margins. If your fridge goes down, you don't have like the extra rainy day fund
Right.
to really put towards that. And so this would use the government to help bridge that gap and give a
Hmm.
grant to do some stuff like that. So I do think that is interesting. I want to talk about one piece of this that I want to be clear, way down on the list of things that matter in all of this. There are the actual food insecurity, actual grocery stores leaving the city. These are the things that matter way more. Okay.
Hmm.
The term food apartheid.
Yep.
Help me understand this one. We just started understanding what a food desert
Food
is,
desert.
and now we're moving to food apartheid. What's
Yeah.
help me understand this one? I don't get it.
Yeah. I get it in a way where I'm like, I get what it's trying to say. I also sometimes feel, at least initially, and I feel like I need to have more conversations with folks and just do more research. And I'm not afraid to say that. I'm like, where did this come from? Like
Yeah.
who, like why this shift? And that I just don't know. I just people just started using it. And I'm like, okay. And we also just tend to just like change names of things without really explaining them. It's just like this is what we're doing now, and then people
Yes.
just don't know why.
This
So I think we
bothers
should.
me, not as somebody who is a writer, not as a.
Yeah. No, I bet. I bet, right? But like there's never really a conversation as to why. But I do think that there's something to be said about this kind of like segregation, right? Of like the food insecurity. You I mean, one, we wouldn't be having this conversation in a place like Wauwatosa or Whitefish Bay, right?
Mhm.
And if we were, for whatever reason, right, say that was a conversation that was happening, I highly doubt they would be using the term food apartheid in a place like Whitefish Bay. And so on one hand, I really do understand kind of the definition, and I think trying to um, kind of talk about the racial undertones in that way by using apartheid. I want to do a little more research because I'm like, where did this come from?
Yeah.
But I did definitely find it interesting. I was like, oh, so this is the term folks are using now. I think food deserts also made a lot of sense. I'm very curious if folks are using them interchangeably, or like why we have changed to like this food apartheid, and if this is a more. I mean, my assumption, which isn't always true, is that when we kind of change these phrases and these names, it's to be more inclusive or to be more, progressive.
Mhm.
So I gotta figure it out a little more because it's not fully landing with me, but I'm like, I guess I get it, if
Well,
I'm
it
being
is, and
honest.
it is like this is again way down on the list of things
Yeah,
that actually matter, but
yeah,
it's just
yeah,
like gets stuck in my head because these
yeah,
these the way we communicate on these issues matter too. And
yes,
I think if you're going to make an impact, if your goal is to make an impact, you're going to throw people off with this terminology. You just are. Like if people are
hmm,
going to see food apartheid, they're going to be like, "What is this?" I'm familiar. I may be familiar with a food desert. I don't know
yeah,
what this word means. This seems like the woke language. I'm out.
hmm,
This is going to turn some people off
yeah,
to this effort just because of the terminology. And as much as that sucks, that's the reality of the political and media landscape that we live in 2026, and we need to
yeah,
reflect that reality. One of the uh, kind of rising Democrats that I have an eye on now on a national stage is Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, who I think
mm-hmm,
is a really interesting
yeah,
individual. And he was on the Daily Show talking about this last week, talking
mm,
about how just like this kind of almost like therapy speak or activist lingo or academia world, because like infected a lot of these things. And he was
yeah,
talking about in terms of like people, in the criminal justice system who may be incarcerated, and people were calling them like justice involved persons or something like that. And he's like,
mm,
well, I think we should call them inmates because that's what they call
mm,
themselves and how and so I think it's just like there's so many of these examples of this, just like we have a term already. We don't need to invent a new thing
yeah.
here. And so like there was another one that's just like I hear people talk about their lived experience a lot.
I say that one a lot. I say
Okay,
that a
what
lot.
is the difference between lived experience and my life? Can't you just say life?
Lived experience sounds better. I don't know. It rolls off the tongue. It sounds, I don't know. No, I say that a lot, not because I feel strongly about it. It's just because I feel like that's the language that everyone is using. And I don't know, when I say lived experience, because I think people like if I just say like, oh, my life, like that could mean a lot of things, but I
Sure.
usually try to unpack what my lived experience. My lived experience of when I lived on 32nd in Wisconsin, and like, like that example that I
But your
gave of
life on 32nd in
yeah, I
Wisconsin
know.
too.
I don't know why. Like it's that's a good question. It's just
This is just
something
me
that
being
everyone just
annoying.
always says,
So,
and I'm like,
yeah.
yeah, no. But I think that goes to show that like and I do think it's helpful to have an evolution of like terms, right? Like you don't really say colored anymore. You know what I mean? You say people of color, and like that's a very important update,
That's
right?
yeah,
And so I'm
that's true.
glad that there's evolutions in language to better reflect the time and the moment of society. I do think that sometimes it's happening so quickly and it's hard for people to catch up because we aren't doing that basic education. If we want people to start to use another term, we might need to just like have a conversation, right?
Yeah.
And especially I'm thinking of like new activists or folks that are getting involved for the first time under this new Trump administration. They may not know these terms either, right? And so it's on us as organizers to have a shared language and shared understanding. I don't know how many meetings I've been in where like we start out the meeting saying this is our definition of power that we are going to operate under. This is our definition of this. So we're all using the shared type of language. But I think it's just all happening so fast that I think people can get overwhelmed. And if you're trying to learn and get a crash course in things like fascism and white supremacy, it can be difficult. And all I ask is that just if you are dedicated to the cause, don't get tripped up by the words. You're going to stumble, you're going to make mistakes, but like just be committed to just doing the best that you can. That's not to say go around calling people colored, but it's just to say you're gonna stumble, but don't let that deter you from the
Yeah.
actual work. Don't let the words deter you if you're going to be an activist and show up or not.
Yeah, and again, this is why I put this way down on the list of things that actually matter in this conversation.
I
But I
think
just,
it's interesting. I
yeah,
like that we went here. Yeah.
yeah, okay. Well, what's our next? We got. I think you have one more topic
Yeah.
then for us to talk about. What do we got?
I saved, I think, probably my favorite thing for last because I feel like we got to win. And I'm like, what's happening? So, a couple weeks ago, actually, a couple months ago, there's been a lot of conversation around not only the police department, but the sheriff's department acquiring this additional facial recognition technology, which would, there would be kind of like this data swap of all of these mugshots, whether you were innocent or not. If you had a mugshot and the case was dropped, that mugshot would still go to this company in exchange for this facial recognition software. Long before the Trump administration, groups like the ACLU had been concerned about additional surveillance for, I think, lots of reasons. It leads to racial profiling and harassment and all sorts of things. And it's just not something you want to have, like this kind of Orwellian police state of surveillance. Like you don't want any of that. But especially now in the Trump administration, where we've seen that we've had reports in other states where people are using, law enforcement is using facial recognition technology to intimidate organizers, activists that have showed up to protest, even journalists, as we've seen. And so, Block, the ACLU, Turners, Milwaukee for Palestine, Milwaukee Alliance, a lot of groups had been kind of organizing and showing up to these Fire and Police Commission meetings and various meetings, making our voices heard. And a couple weeks ago, there was roughly 3 hours of public testimony in front of the Fire and Police Commission saying we don't want additional facial recognition technology. This is harmful to our communities. I think what was beautiful about the last couple of weeks of these testimonies is that so many different organizations were united in saying no, but then also have their slivers of talking about their own communities. And so really being intersectional and everyone really showing up for each other. You had pro-Palestinian folks saying, this is terrible for immigrants and this is terrible for Black people. And the way all these issues were connected was beautiful to see. I happened to be out of town at the time, so I'm like watching from my phone. And I was like, all right, so the Fire and Police Commission, they're going to make a recommendation to the council. We need to lobby the council, make sure the council doesn't accept the recommendation. We might need to talk to the mayor, right? I'm playing through how the next steps. And then the next morning, it comes out that Police Chief Jeffrey Norman put an immediate ban on acquiring further facial recognition technology, but then also they've been kind of using it on the low quietly and kind of ending that as well too. And that was a surprise. Like we were prepared to kind of see this process through of like, all right, how do we make sure that the Fire and Police Commission, writes a recommendation to not use it, but then go through the Common Council and the alders. And after it just seemed that I again going back to being a little jaded, when you see the police chief that's just like, all right, I heard you, we're not going to do this. I'm like, what's happening? What do you mean? You let us win very easily. We just showed up for 3 hours last night, 2 hours the meeting before, and then suddenly we're just not doing it. very happy. Also was very like, what's the catch here? We'll see how this
Were
continues
you
to play
looking
out.
to see if the tweet was like from a fake account
Yeah.
or like the announcement was from a fake press release or some like
Always.
one of those like, oh, Giannis got traded fake account type of things or whatever?
I saw the notification on my phone and I was like, huh, whatever. And then I clicked on it and I was like, no. And then I like Googled more. I was like, oh, wait, what? Was my initial
Yeah, yeah.
reaction. So I'm curious to see, how long this ban will go, if it will shift later on, if the timeline is like, okay, we're not going to do this for the next maybe year or two, but we're going to revisit this at another time. But right now, there is a ban on facial recognition technology with the Milwaukee Police Department. And that is a huge win for everybody that came out and testified, submitted testimony, especially the last like couple months. So
Yeah. Well, I totally agree with you. It is a huge win. I agree with banning the use of this type of technology in law enforcement in Milwaukee. It's such a slippery slope with
yeah.
the use of this type of thing. I think there are, as you indicated, a lot of constitutional problems when it comes to the use of
Mhm.
this. I think it's one thing for and I think every industry struggles with this to a certain extent, right? Just like how do we best use technology in a
Mhm.
way that makes our jobs easier or can make us more successful in what we're doing. And law enforcement has to balance those types of questions just as we all have to balance
Yeah.
those types of questions as we go through our thing. So, I think they're, curious as some people say, oh, you're taking a tool away from out of the toolbox that could fight crime or whatever it might be. But I think that just the downside of this is just that it seems so ripe for the system to be abused and for
Absolutely.
constitutional protections to be trampled over. And as we've seen in Minnesota over the past few weeks, like if
Mhm.
I don't know how many thousands of cases there are against ICE agents right now
Right.
about their kind of approach to just due process in the Constitution and what exactly members of law enforcement should abide by in doing their jobs. And I think this just is one of those things that it just takes a step too far. Like I
Mhm.
even saw some kind of like more libertarian leaning folks on the right being like, yeah, I kind of, I'm a supporter of law enforcement, whatever it might be, but I disagree with the use of this. And so I do think this is a real win. Like, do you think this is an example of the process actually working? Like there was a proposal to do something, the public pushed back on it, and they backed down and took a different course of action. Like, do you think this is an actual successful example of a organized, peaceful process pushing back on something that could be really harmful for people?
Absolutely. This is how the process should work. And I think I'm so surprised because I've just been doing this work and this organizing for so long that it's never this easy, right? This is the type of process we push for, is that there is transparency, there is accountability, there is some sort of public forum. And then what's really interesting is, yes, people have these public forums, but then acting on what you're actually hearing. I think in my experience, I've seen so many times where elected officials, I'm like, I'm going to have a town hall about this particular issue. And we know it's not going to change how they view that issue. They're just going through the motions to pretend that they're listening
Right.
to the community, but they're not doing anything. Because I don't know how many town halls, public forums I organize to have people speak, or I speak myself, and there'll be overwhelming support for a particular issue or a particular stance. And they're like, yeah, no, we're just not going to do that. So I'm like, why did we go through this motion and like pretend that you cared about public input and our opinions when you're just going to
Hmm.
do what you want anyways? And I think that's why I was so taken aback, because it's kind of rare for that to actually happen, especially
Yeah.
even in places like Madison. You'll have day long testimony about some really harmful anti-trans bill, and you have all these people talking about how harmful it is and this and that, and then the Republican controlled legislature is like, yep, don't care, we're going to move this
Hmm.
on because this is what
Hmm.
we want. And I think that was the most shocking part of why I didn't believe it, is because very rarely, yes, there may be opportunities to provide public comment, but very rarely has that public comment actually been influenced into policy.
There are so many examples of just the public officials holding these comment sessions and forums and town halls,
Hmm.
and that being the end of the
Yeah.
conversation. Not it's supposed to like the idea would be those would be like a conversation starter to get something going. I don't know how many of these I've covered with involving the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, where
Hmm.
they are holding these hearings to say, hey, we want community feedback on whether it's a good idea to widen I-94, and you get all of
Yeah.
these activists that show up
Yep.
and say this is a bad idea. We don't need to do this, and they go back and say, all right, we have heard you, and we are still going to be widening I-94.
Yep.
And so like that is you and I have both, I guess, grown accustomed to that being the
Yeah.
way that things tend to operate, and this being this example with the facial recognition technology being an exception to that, but
Hmm.
a good exception, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And more of this, right? Like more of, and
yeah,
also like it wasn't, and I think what is interesting, this was a fire and police commission meeting that had open public comment, right?
hmm
This wasn't a rally, love rallies. This wasn't a march, it wasn't a protest, right? No one got hurt. Like, were people uncomfortable maybe by some of the things that they were hearing from the community? Sure, right? But like that's part of the gig of being a public servant, as
hmm
being a commissioner, as being an elected official. And I just wanted to highlight too, that this is something that didn't also need to escalate, right? Like we could just have this conversation here, have a dialogue. Because best believe my mind was like, okay, we're gonna need to like rally. You need to blast like Alder's phone numbers to get people to call that, right? You know what I mean? We didn't have to do any of that, and it's really refreshing when you don't have to have like a march or a rally where you have to think about, do you have a lawyer's phone number and the right shoes in order to make your voice heard?
hmm yeah. The process works
It
occasionally,
does. It does
every
when
once
it
in a
wants
while.
to. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I've got one more headline for
Okay.
us then here. So the headline, another one from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel from about a week ago. The headline is Dem governor candidate Rodriguez says she, quote, misspoke about aiding
Oh.
ICE. So here's what happened. So a lot of these candidates for governor, since our public forum about a month ago, really kind of kicked things up a notch for people having for this campaign being public and not just a fundraising in the background and talking to supporters and whatever it might be. Things are good and out in the open now, and now we're starting to see this campaign take shape. And so Lieutenant Governor Sarah Rodriguez is among the top candidates in this field, and she gave an interview with AJ Bayatpour at CBS 58. Shout out to AJ, great
Mhm.
reporter.
Yep.
And she gave an interview talking about the way that ICE would approach certain instances involving an administrative warrant. And so,
Mhm.
like, this is something I had to look up and talk to my immigration attorney friend about to get some of the details and what is the difference between an administrative warrant and a judicial warrant. And so,
Mhm.
what Lieutenant Governor Rodriguez said in this interview, she said, quote, if they have an administrative warrant, then somebody has been asked to leave the country because they have an order to leave and they know they're there. They know they can go to that particular agency, yada, yada, yada. So my understanding of the difference between this administrative warrant and the judicial warrant is that ICE is part of the executive branch, part of the Department of Homeland Security, and as the executive branch, they can write these administrative warrants, but they don't have to go to a judge to get the warrant. So I think this creates a whole lot of like Fourth Amendment issues,
Yeah.
a lot of due process issues, and basically what the lieutenant governor was saying in this is that people should honor these administrative warrants. And there's like a lot of debate on how like local law enforcement should or should not cooperate with ICE, with other agencies within the Department of Homeland Security. I think we're seeing why a little bit
Yeah.
over in
A little
Minnesota.
bit. Mhm.
And so my understanding of this administrative warrant is like if an ICE agent can just write it themselves without
Yeah.
having to go to a judge. So it's very different from like the process in local law enforcement or whatever it might be. And so there was kind of some immediate pushback from a number of the other candidates running for governor. Kelda Roys said something. Missy Hughes said something. There was a lot of criticism from a lot of people who have a lot of legitimate skepticism of what's going on with ICE about honoring these administrative warrants. And then Rodriguez eventually said, I misspoke, and have been very clear in this issue in my calls for Wisconsin to lead our response to unlawful ICE activity, no arrests without a judicial warrant. So a couple things here. One, I think the Democratic Party in general has done a terrible job of talking about the issue of immigration.
We've talked about this several
And we've talked about this a
times.
lot. And I don't really know, like, if you ask 10 people what the Democratic Party stands for on the issue of immigration, I think you're going to get 10 different answers because they have not clearly articulated where they stand outside of just being opposed to Trump, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a debate like this can really get you into the details about like what the type of action a governor can take, what type of action, leaders at the local level can take with the, like, their cooperation with ICE and whatever. I know County Executive David Crowley gave an interview, I think it was around the same time, saying that he doesn't want to work with ICE at all, basically.
I saw a split screen graphic of like what she said and what he said, and I was like, oh, okay.
It's very different, right? and so, but then she, Lieutenant Governor Rodriguez walks it back. And so I think there are the two things happening here is that one is just like, here is a substantive conversation about immigration happening in a Democratic primary. I think we should pay pretty close attention to this because I think this is speaking to an issue the Democrats have failed to get an actual policy platform on. And two, we're starting to see a little spice here in the governor's race. What do you make of all that?
One, thanks for breaking down the difference, right? But here's the between administrative warrant and a judicial warrant. My initial takeaway is that's an important distinction. It's an unfortunate like tone that she misspoke because I think the damage is done, right? Like I don't think the average voter is like, oh, I get it now. Yeah, she misspoke. Like her supporters will defend her, absolutely. But if you're still making up your mind and you see that and you see the split screen between her and other folks, no one really, I don't think people are going to get into the weeds the way we just did about the differences in warrants. They see that there is an exception of when you think it's okay to cooperate with ICE. That's all people will see. And that's a huge fumble for her. I will also say, I think in some circles, folks have been saying, ooh, this feels like maybe she's not ready for prime time. And I hate to say it, these are not my words. She is the current lieutenant governor. But I think people are concerned about maybe some of the clunkiness of her campaign, including her rollout and, some of the things like when did she know that the governor was going to announce not running and things like that. There's been some parts in her campaign that have been clunky. And that's not to say that people can't make mistakes. I've been on several campaigns. I've ran campaigns that were clunky and that were, little not the greatest, right? And so it's not to say that people can't make mistakes, but when you have a very crowded primary where you need to separate yourself and carve a lane for yourself, this is not the lane that you want to carve. And so I'm very curious to see how she kind of cleans this up. And I personally I think there's so many fantastic candidates running. I just want to see her campaign be a little bit more sharper. And when she said, oh, well, my stance on this issue has been clear, when I read that, I was like, has it though? Like, has it really? Like, I don't know, because we've had so many conversations that I
don't think any Democrat has a clear position on immigration, to be perfectly honest,
Absolutely. Like they don't have a clear and we can zoom out a little bit and talk about the safety issue, whether it's defund the police, immigration. They don't have a way to really address concerns about law enforcement in this country as a whole, including immigration. And so when she said that and was like, my stance has been clear, I'm like, I don't think it's clear with anyone. That's not to say I think this is a campaign ending thing for her. Absolutely not. I just think it's a unforced error, and I'm curious to see how her campaign responds moving forward. Are people going to continue bringing this up? Is she going to have to keep answering for this over and over and over again? Is it going to continue to get some traction? I don't know. But these are some of the conversations that some of my networks are saying. Again, not necessarily my words, but what people are saying because of her comments.
Yeah, and I also think too, it is like oddly refreshing. Like I didn't agree with what she said, but I do kind of appreciate that she didn't double down on it like we see
Sure.
from so many other
Yeah.
politicians and just be like,
Mhm.
nope, this is what I didn't misspeak. I'm doubling down. I'm not apologizing. We see so much of that on the right, obviously, in
Yep.
particular, the Trump administration in particular, that it's almost refreshing to see any politician saying I made a mistake. But she still did make a
Hmm.
mistake. And
Yeah.
so, but I do think as this campaign progresses, like we're starting to see a lot of different views on immigration from the candidates in this campaign. Like we saw there was that interview I mentioned with David Crowley on Up Front. Kelda Roys was critical of these comments from Rodriguez. Missy Hughes was critical of these comments from Rodriguez. Mandela Barnes got a ton of criticism for holding up an Abolish ICE shirt that he ran as fast as he could away from in the 2022 primary and campaign for Senate. Where is he going to land on this issue?
Yeah.
And then we've got, Francesca Hong not only saying abolish ICE, but I think she's gone as far to say abolish DHS to a certain degree too.
Candidate that we know
Yeah.
where Fran probably stands the most.
Yeah,
Obviously.
and so I think this is, I think as I have stated for about a year now, I think there is a Wisconsin race that always previews a national election.
Yeah.
And I think with the Democrats struggling so mightily to figure out where they stand on immigration, maybe wonky, nuanced, political insider talk like this can get to a point where we're actually having a substantive conversation about where the Democratic Party actually stands on this issue that Donald Trump says was his number one issue and the reason he got elected in 2024. Like, I just think there's been, there's a lot that I've appreciated the Democrats have done, like Representative Castro from Texas and the efforts to get some of the children out of detention in the facility there. There are a lot of really important efforts, a lot happening on the legal front that kind of flies under the radar. When you talk about partisan politics and all of that from, Democratic AGs or whatever it might be. And so I don't want to say the Democrats are doing nothing to push back on that because that would be wrong to characterize too. But I also think like you can't just operate in the sense of being against Trump and being against the current crisis that Trump is creating with his immigration policies. There has to be a platform looking forward.
Yep.
And not just at the federal level, because we know like a lot of this has to happen through Congress, through the types of immigration reform that has, not happened for generations in this country. But there are also decisions for governors, for state lawmakers to be talking about in the immigration issue. And I think they need to be having that. And I'm glad they are.
Yeah. And, if nothing else, even if somebody misspoke, at least folks are having the conversation now.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we've been talking here and having our conversation for more than an hour now. So
and we could talk for hours longer about all
and
of
we
this.
we could. We absolutely could. We could grab 3 more headlines each and just talk all day, and that'd be a great time. But we got to wrap it up at some point. You've got to get to the state of the state tonight. I've got to get back to all sorts of other stuff that I'm working on. But always wonderful to take some time to recombobulate with you, Angela, and hope to talk again soon.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.